Sup you beautiful people, hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Naruto was Shinobi Ashikabi. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So now let's start this video. I'm kinda surprised you let them go. Naruto looked up from where he was walking to the rendezvous point to stare at Chiho, who had his twins standing on either side of him as they made their way down the street. The scruffy-looking male clarified when he saw the blonde raise an eyebrow at him. I'm surprised you just let him go like that. You thought I would kill him? Asked Naruto, tilting his head to the side as he tried to understand where Chiho was going with this. Well, yeah, Chiho shrugged. You don't seem like the type who would be skittish about killing someone else. Once more those deceptively sharp eyes came into focus on looked at Naruto. I kinda figured half the reason you wanted to meet with Higa was so that you could take him out of the game. Naruto nodded. He could see the man's point as Chiho had pegged him to a T as far as killing went. There are many more ways to defeat an enemy than simply killing them. Naruto had plans for Higa and his Sekirei. As one of the big three, Higa would prove incredibly useful in whittling down the number of Sekirei Naruto and his own flock would have to fight. It was the whole reason he had let the man go when he had the opportunity to kill him. Is this one of those enemy of my enemy situations? Asked Chiho, seeking clarification. Not really, Naruto said, casting another glance at Chiho before turning back to the road. I don't really have any enemies right now, not unless you count every Ashikabi and Sekirei pair in the Sekirei clan as an enemy. At his words, the lightning twins, Hikari and Hibiki, both tensed. Chiho, on the other hand, dismissed everything the blonde said with a laugh. Then I suppose it's a good thing I'm not interested in the Sekirei plan, Chiho said with a feral grin. He looked at the blonde once more and shook his head. I don't think I'd want to be on the receiving end of whatever it is you have planned for the other Ashikabi in this game. Game? Naruto blinked at the word, then shook his head. Never mind, he gave the man an amused look. And yes, it's a very good thing you don't have any interest in the Sekirei plan. Otherwise, we'd end up being enemies at some point, and I'd hate to have to kill someone who was friends with me as husband. Once more the twins tensed and Chiho laughed. Somehow I don't think that would stop you if you really wanted to kill me. It was almost disturbing how easily this man spoke of Naruto killing him. Granted, the scruffy Ashikabi probably knew the blonde didn't have any intention of doing so and was just cracking a joke, but if Naruto were anyone other than himself, he may have very well been disturbed by Chiho's ability to speak of his death so easily. There was a moment of peace after that. Chiho had placed his hands behind his head and was walking with a slumped posture as Hikari and Hibiki walked beside him, casting anxious and slightly mistrustful glances Naruto's way. It seemed his talk of death and killing had disturbed them, not that he actually cared about what they thought. It wasn't like the two were his Sekirei. Hands in his pockets, the eternal shinobi simply continued walking as his mind wandered back to the battle so he could properly review his actions. He was on the fence about how the fight had gone. On the one hand, he didn't do badly. He had kept pace with two Sekirei in combat while being limited to taijutsu, while being able to use only a small amount of chakra to enhance his muscles. Of course, the term small was very relative when it came to him and chakra. Still, it was definitely a noteworthy feat. At the same time, he knew that he could have done better. Had he been in his prime during the fight, pure taijutsu or not, those two wouldn't have lasted long against him. However, he did have to allow himself a bit of leeway with this. He had only just started retraining his body in taijutsu a week ago. Even if his muscles hadn't atrophied, his body had become unaccustomed to the rigors of intense combat. After all, there hadn't been anyone within several thousand years who was capable of using chakra, and while he had met some decent fighters in the earlier years of his immortality, they didn't quite compare to the raw power and talent of a Sekirei. There was also the matter of his chakra that had to be taken into account. Naruto's chakra was very much a double-edged sword. It had incredible regenerative properties that, when combined with his Uzumaki genes and attunement with nature, made him pretty much impossible to kill. In fact, he had yet to find a type of wound or damage that he couldn't heal from. It was also this combination of potent chakra, Uzumaki bloodline, and the powers granted to him as a sage that had made him immortal. Yet it was this very chakra that had torn his muscles to shreds during his fight with Yomi. His battle with number 43 had actually been the first time in over 2,000 years that he had used chakra for anything other than his seals and his henge. It only made sense that his body would not be able to withstand the amount of power that had been coursing through it without suffering damage. After all, despite his immortality, his body was still human. It would take time for his body to become accustomed to his inhuman chakra again. Thinking back on his use of it during this battle, Naruto did have to admit that he was pleased with how he had been able to control it. For a while he had been worried that he would have issues keeping his power reined in, but while it had been difficult, it had not been impossible. The battle against Ichiya and Toyotama had proven that. He had controlled his chakra admirably. Not only had he not suffered from having his muscles ripped to shreds by his own chakra, he had also managed to keep his enhanced body down to a level that would not make people think there was something off about him, only allowing his chakra to bring his body's physical prowess to a level that was a little less powerful than the average Sekirei. While such a boost in strength would normally be a cause for suspicion, Naruto had made sure to keep his speed down to a more human level, merely using the chakra to reinforce his muscles and skin so they could withstand damage more easily, so that no one would realize just how powerful he truly was. At least that was his hope. He had taken a big risk by showing his combat prowess. It was his hope that by fighting against a Sekirei, or in this case 2 Sekirei, Higa would realize that Naruto didn't need the protection of his Sekirei to keep safe, and that he was just as capable of fighting as his own Sekirei were. This would in effect make it so that once word spread about what happened at the hospital, people would know not to mess with him and stay away. That would allow him time and space so he could begin making more plans for the Sekirei plan. "You're a pretty weird guy, you know that." Sio's words snapped the blonde out of his thoughts. Turning, Naruto looked over to see the man walking next to him in a slouched posture, giving him an amused look. "How so?" the eternal shinobi asked, more out of a need to rid himself of inane thoughts than any real form of curiosity. "You've always struck me as the jump and feet first type of guy," Sio mused out loud, idly scratching his chin. "You know, the one who prefers rushing into his obstacles headlong without giving it much thought." Naruto almost snorted in amusement at those words. Once upon a time he had been exactly like that, someone who, as the relatively, to him, new saying went shoot first and ask questions later kind of guy. But that was a long time ago, before he had suffered more failures than he can accurately count due to his inability to think things through. Not that Sio was aware of this as he continued. "I never really saw you as a deep thinker. Yet every time I've seen you, you always get this intense look on your face, like you're thinking about something deep. Perhaps you shouldn't judge a book by its cover," Naruto said with a shrug. "Heh, maybe," the man admitted as he placed his hands behind his head and continued to walk with his 2 Sekirei alongside him. The silence that permeated the group only lasted for another few seconds or so before the non-blonde male spoke up again. "So I noticed you're not calling that shrew who owns your boarding house Miya-chan anymore," Sio commented, watching Naruto as he walked on. For his part, the blonde did not let himself react to the words. At least not on the outside. His mind did seize up a bit at the thought of Miya, more specifically the thought of just what he was going to do about the situation they were in, which was unfortunately nothing because he was unsure of what he should do. Naruto paused, then frowned as he wondered what he should tell Sio. His problems with Miya weren't any of this man's business, and if Naruto didn't want to tell his Sekirei, then what made this man think he would tell him? And yet, Sio had known Miya far longer than anyone else, except maybe Matsu. But Matsu was also a Sekirei on top of being female. He doubted she would have any useful insight into his problem, but maybe Sio would. Having some troubles at the moment, he finally admitted. "I'm not surprised," Sio told him with a nod. "That damn shrew is hard to get along with, that's for sure. I honestly don't know what Takeito saw in her." This time Naruto did react, a slight twitching of his hand that made it look like he was about to withdraw one of the kunai hidden up his sleeve. The scruffy Ashikabi noticed this and chuckled. "Actually, you and Miya are pretty similar when you think about it, so it would make sense that you two might not always get along." Naruto frowned. "And just how are we similar?" "Well, for one thing, both of you are pretty scary," Sio said, and were the situation not serious, for Naruto at least, said blonde may have actually found some amusement in the man's words. "You two also seem to have similar opinions on certain issues, similar ways of speaking, at least when you're insulting others, and both of you have this strange feel about you that I just don't get from anyone else. Really, it's kinda creepy," he finished with a shudder that Naruto could not tell whether or not it was being faked. The blonde frowned as he pondered Sio's words. They were true, in a way they were more true than even Sio realized. He and Miya were very similar. Both were beings of incredible power, Both were well acquainted with loss, and neither of them had any qualms about spying, blackmailing, and using intimidation tactics to get what they wanted. Really, their similarities in those regards were actually quite uncanny. And after coming to this realization, Naruto couldn't help but let out a self-depreciating chuckle. "I'm such a hypocrite," he muttered to himself, his two jaw-length bangs swaying back and forth as he shook his head. How had he not seen it? It was so obvious now that it had been pointed out to him. He had gotten angry at Mia for doing the same thing to him that he had done to hundreds, thousands of others. And why? Because someone had finally managed to do what so many people throughout history have tried and failed to accomplish. Because it was perfectly acceptable for him to spy on others but not the other way around. Mia had only done the same thing he would have done if their situations were reversed. He couldn't fault her for that. Perhaps that was also why he ran out on her. From the moment they had met, Naruto knew she was different than everyone else. There had been something about her that just demanded respect. It wasn't the persona of the kind-hearted landlady or the understanding and compassion she possessed, nor it her wit and teasing nature. It was her aura, the way she held herself. While much different than his own, Naruto could not help but see her as an equal, which explained why he could tell her things he had not told his own Sekirei. And it explained why he ran out when she had prostrated herself before him and begged for his forgiveness. Because she had done something that Naruto was not sure he himself would have done if their positions were reversed. "You say something?" asked Chiho. "Not a thing." "Ah, Naruto-sama." As expected, Musubi was the first one to greet him when he got to the rendezvous point. The blonde put on a slight smile as the most enthusiastic of his Sekirei ran up to him, stopping just as she reached him. He was slightly surprised to note that his smile felt genuine and that it came so easily. Was this a sign that he was actually beginning to let himself enjoy the emotions his Sekirei brought to him? "Did your part in this mission go well?" Musubi was unaware of his thoughts as she asked her question, looking quite excited by something. She felt excited too. It was so thick in the bond that it was almost palpable. "My part went fine thanks to Chiho and his girls," Naruto said with a gesture towards the lazy-looking male and his two Sekirei. As he spoke, Hikari leaned over and cupped her hand to her mouth to whisper into Hibiki's ear. "Not like he actually needed our help." Her soft voice was accompanied by her twin's subtle nod of agreement. Hibiki may have said something in response to her sister, but at that moment Naruto turned his head and cast a glare at the pair, causing the two to almost seize up as they stood ramrod straight. After a second or two, Naruto turned around and the lightning twins relaxed and gave identical sighs of relief. "What were you two saying?" asked Tamura with a suspicious narrowing of his eyes. The twins tensed, their gaze traveling to Naruto, who thankfully spoke before they could. "Hikari was just saying that without them, I would have been in much more trouble." Hamura frowned, then eyed the trio behind his Ashikabi. Chiho just gave a lazy grin while the lightning twins looked unsure whether to accept his praise or not. The blonde almost smiled. It looked like he was right in his thoughts about Chiho knowing when to speak up and when to keep his mouth shut. He was quite intuitive that way. Looking back at Musubi, Naruto asked, "And what about you? Did you and the others do well?" "I had a great time." It seemed Naruto's question went over Musubi's head. Rather than thinking he meant, "Did you get hurt?" she assumed he was asking, "Did you have fun?" which were two completely different questions. "I got to fight this really strong opponent who used swords, and fighting her was really tough. But I did it, I beat her. I think I'm getting stronger, Naruto-sama." The busty Sekirei in shrine maiden garb held a fist to her face, her eyes alight with fire. "I won't stop until I become as powerful as Landlady-sama, and I'm sure you'll get there eventually," Naruto assured her, his lips fighting a grin. For some reason the blonde knew not, he couldn't help but find amusement in her words. Really, there was something disturbingly familiar about this girl. He just couldn't place his finger on it. Shaking his head, he eyed the others that had been with Musubi. Hamura was looking at the two of them, arms crossed as he gave Musubi an exasperated look. Perhaps the mission hadn't gone as smoothly as Musubi had said. A clinking of chains had Naruto turning his head to look at Akitsu as she walked up beside him, positioning herself on his left, her usual position. Standing a few feet from the main group was Uzume, who was holding another person in the large swaths of cloth that must have something to do with her Sekirei powers. The person in question was a young girl, probably nearing the end of her teen years. She was a frail-looking girl, possessing a rail, thin body under the hospital gown she was wearing. She had long, light brown, almost blonde hair and soft brown eyes that bespoke of great kindness. Naruto thought she was a decently attractive girl, but would definitely need some special nourishment, so she didn't look like a stiff breeze would blow her away. Walking over to the duo, Naruto stopped in front of them and put on a grin. "Hello, you must be Chiho, right?" "That's right," the girl, Chiho as he had guessed, said, her voice sounding just as frail as her body looked. Despite that, there was a hidden something in her tone that Naruto couldn't place. He would have tried to figure out what that something was, but Chiho continued speaking before he could begin his ponderings. "You are Uzumaki Naruto-san, right?" she asked before smiling. "Uzume-chan has told me a lot about you." "Nothing bad, I hope," Naruto said, casting an amused glance at Uzume, who was suddenly looking a tad pale. "She says that Naruto-san is very funny to watch," Chiho stated. "That he has a lot of funny stories to tell about his travels, and that he's a really good cook." Naruto glanced over at Uzume to see the tomboy's face burning red. Turning back to Chiho, he saw that the girl had a wistful smile. "I've always wanted to be able to travel myself. I've often wondered what it would be like to go to the beach and see the ocean, to visit places where the sky is clear and unobstructed by the city. It sounds very nice." "You will, Chiho," Uzume said, her voice slightly choked. A quick look at her face revealed unshed tears. Clearly this was a conversation she and her Ashikabi had many times in the past. "I promised you that we would visit these places, remember? That I would take you there. We'll be able to do that now. I found someone who can help us." "Which is why she took you out of the hospital," Naruto interrupted, drawing attention to himself. "According to Uzume, the medication they were giving you at the hospital was only a temporary solution. However, I'm fairly sure that I can cure your disease permanently." "Really?" asked Chiho, looking from him to Uzume in confirmation. "Really?" Naruto said as Uzume nodded. "Thank you, Naruto-san." Chiho bowed her head towards the blonde. She probably would have made an actual bow if she could, but considering she was wrapped in cloth and had a very frail body, it was understandable that she couldn't do more. "There's no need to thank me," Naruto said with a shake of his head. "Uzume simply asked me for help and I agreed to give it to her. That's all there is to it." Despite his words, Chiho smiled at him, causing the blonde to turn his head slightly. "Still, I thank you anyways," she stated firmly, or as firmly as a frail girl wrapped in cloth like a cocoon could state. "For agreeing to help my Uzume. She's been getting really sad lately, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. This was the first time since I've seen her where she doesn't look like she's about to cry." Naruto's face adopted an uncomfortable look. For some reason, hearing this frail girl thank him bothered him immensely. Perhaps it was because he was simply not used to being thanked for the things he had done, not so earnestly anyways. Or it could have just been that he was so unused to such heartfelt thanks that it made him uncomfortable. It had been a long time since he'd really helped someone just because he could after all. Current Sekirei he had winged not included in this, of course. Whatever the case was, the blonde felt distinctly distressed perhaps by her heartfelt words, even if he didn't know why. "Chiho," Uzume pouted, puffing up her cheeks slightly and complained, though just what she was complaining about was anyone's guess. "Sorry, Uzume-chan, unless of course your name just so happened to be Chiho," who seemed to understand her Sekirei well enough to understand the reason for the tomboy's pouting. "The bond between them must be quite strong." "Right, well," Naruto coughed into his hand in order to regain control of the situation. He didn't need any thoughts distracting him and didn't want the others to notice how uncomfortable he was. "We should probably get going. While I doubt Higa will do anything rash, I don't want to risk him sending Sekirei after us to reclaim Chiho." "Higa," Chiho mumbled, then looked at Uzume. "Isn't that the man who owns the hospital I was in? Does he have something to do with why Uzume-chan has been so sad lately?" "Of course not." Uzume's cheerful reply was quickly marred by her glare at Naruto, a silent message for him to keep his mouth shut. The blonde frowned, but seeing as he didn't want to antagonize the situation, decided it would be best if he remained quiet. "Now let's get going. I want to be home soon so we can get you fixed up." Chiho looked at her Sekirei in some concern, but eventually just seemed to accept that Uzume wouldn't be saying anything more and nodded. "Right," Naruto sighed before straightening and began issuing orders. "We'll be using a diamond formation to get home. Hamura, I want you in front. Anyone matching the description of a Sekirei under Higa's employ comes to close, blast them." Hamura nodded and Naruto turned to Akitsu. "You're going to be behind us. If we end up getting followed, it will be your job to slow the enemy down as much as possible." Akitsu nodded her head once. "Yes, Ashikabi-sama." Musubi, the eternal shinobi, turned to his bustiest Sekirei, who was looking at him in excitement. Obviously she thought this was good fun. He should have figured she would. "You'll be on the left-hand side while I take the right." "Don't worry, Naruto-sama," Musubi told him with a confident smile. I'll make sure to protect everyone here. Naruto repressed a small grin as Musubi clenched her fist. I'm sure you will, he told her, before a snicker caught his attention. Turning to look at Chiho, he saw that the man was coughing into his hand to hide his laugh. Something funny? He asked mildly, a single eyebrow raised in inquiry. It's just that you almost sounded like a military commander right then, Chiho said, grinning widely. Naruto shook his head, not even tempted to tell the man that he had been a military commander, a horrible one that had gotten almost all of his friends killed. There was no need to bring up his past, especially one as painful as the first in a large series of failures. Deciding the man's commented was even worth a response, he instead asked a question. What will you three be doing now? Well, you've already paid us, Chiho started. Naruto nodded, already knowing this. He had been them in advance after all, so I guess we'll just head home. He looked at the blonde as he spoke. Unless you need us for something else? Not at the moment, Naruto replied with a shake of his head. However, give me a few days to work out the details and I should have another job lined up for you. This one will actually be much easier too, something I'm sure you'll like. You bet I would, Chiho told him with a grin. I'm never one to turn down easy money, especially since we're almost always broke, Hikari mumbled angrily. Hibiki nodded in agreement, causing Chiho to frown. Aw, come on, he whined. It's not that bad, not that bad. Hikari's right eye gained a violent twitch. We almost never have any money. We always have to mooch off Mia because we never have enough food because what money we do earn is usually spent by you on booze, and the few times you do get a job, they only last a few weeks before you get fired for slacking off. How is that not bad? Well, when you put it like that, Chiho started with a grin as he rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't seem particularly concerned that his temperamental Sekirei looked like she might shoot lightning at him at any moment. Naruto concluded that this was probably one of those long-standing arguments they'd had and decided to ignore it. It wasn't any of his business what Chiho did with the money he earned. Let's just go, Hikari said with a sigh, almost seeming to deflate. Perhaps this argument had happened so often that the fight had been taken out of her. Right, Chiho wrapped an arm around both his girls and gave one last look at Naruto. We'll be seeing ya, kid, he said, and once more Naruto had to suppress an eye twitch at being called a kid. He understood that he looked young, but having someone several thousand years younger than him constantly calling him kid was seriously beginning to piss him off. Be sure to give a call when you have that job lined up. I'll even give you the friend rate. Yeah, sure, Naruto said, thanking his growing control of his emotions that none of his annoyance escaped into his tone when he spoke. He watched as Chiho, Hikari, and Hibiki walked off, disappearing around a corner, then turned to his Sekirei and the two that he was not bonded with. Shall we be off then? He asked. There was a unanimous agreement between them, and the group found themselves walking back to Mason Izumo, in the formation that Naruto had placed them in. It was only a few seconds after they began moving that a loud shout of pervert, followed by the sound of lightning striking the ground, and probably a person if Naruto's theory was correct, followed by a loud scream of anguish that confirmed his theory reached their ears. And that was the man Naruto would soon come to rely on when he wanted a job that he couldn't do himself done. Naruto couldn't repress a sigh. When they arrived at Mason Izumo, it was much later than most of them had expected. Himura and Musubi had wanted to roof hop, and truth be told, Naruto had kind of wanted to as well. It had been a long time since he had done any ninja-style roof jumping. In spite of that, he had been adamant that they remain on the ground and simply walk home, his justification being that jumping from roof to roof wasn't conspicuous, and while it didn't look like there was anyone following them, that didn't necessarily mean they weren't. Granted, Matsu would probably let them know if they were being followed, but the instincts that had been bred into Naruto since integrating himself amongst regular humans had been very against the idea of roof hopping. And so they were stuck walking. By the time they had gotten back home, the sun was already beginning to set. It was actually quite a beautiful sight, with the sun slowly sinking on the horizon, gentle rays of light creating an array of colors that ranged from orange and red to purple and magenta. The vast metropolitan city spread out before them served as a startling contrast with nature's canvas, yet only seemed to enhance the scene rather than detract from it. Mia was waiting for them to return, it seemed, as the woman was standing outside of the boarding house when they walked up. "Welcome back," she said, smiling at the group as they all walked up to the front porch. Naruto frowned as he looked at the landlady. She sounded very cheerful, too cheerful when considering what had occurred just minutes before they had left on their mission. He couldn't help but feel that there was something off about this situation. When Mia turned, began greeting each of his Sekirei individual, then went over to Uzumaki and her Ashikabi, ignoring him, he realized just what was off. "And who is this?" The Lavenderette began with her perennial smile as she looked at Chiho, her eyes crinkling. "Is this your Ashikabi, Uzumaki-san?" she asked, turning her eyes from one girl to the other. Uzumaki gifted the woman with a smile, her eyes softening as they moved down to look at Chiho. "Yeah," she said softly, a truly beautiful smile lighting her face. "This is my Chiho." Said young woman in question seemed to blush a bit at the look of devotion and absolute love she was getting, but still managed to smile in spite of her face turning the same shade of a lobster. Naruto closed his eyes and suppressed a grimace as he watched the scene. He had a feeling this would happen. One of the theories he had come up with when thinking up Mia's reaction was that she would ignore him like this. The other two was that she would either try talking to him again or staying in her room where she wouldn't be bothered. It seemed he had just been given the worst-case scenario for when the time came to apologize. And unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to get that part out of the way for a while yet. He still needed to heal Chiho first. "Uzumaki," Naruto said. Despite his voice being soft, he managed to catch everyone's attention. Everyone except for Mia, who was still ignoring him. The eternal shinobi tried not to let that bother him as he spoke. "We should probably get Chiho to your room so I can begin healing her," he stated, and Uzume's eyes widened as she seemed to remember the reason they had gone out of their way to rescue her Ashikabi in the first place. "Right," she said, nodding her head as a serious expression took over her face. "I'll just go put her in bed then." Naruto watched as Uzumaki walked towards the door, which opened through a nifty use of her clothes, then walked into Mason Izumo. Turning, he looked over at his Sekirei. "I'll be going upstairs with Uzumaki," he started. "I don't know how long the healing process will be, so you guys should probably use this time to relax." "Right," Musubi was the one who spoke up first. "I think I'll go take a bath then. All that fighting made me sticky-like when I spar with Landlady Sama." She turned her head to look at the light-haired ice user next to her. "Would you like to join me, Akitsu-san? We can wash each other's backs." "Ah," Akitsu tilted her head to left, seemingly considering Musubi's suggestion. She then looked over at Naruto, who upon seeing her questioning gaze gave her a nod and encouraging smile. The snow woman then looked back as the fist fighter and nodded. "Yes, great, let's go," Musubi crowed as she grabbed Akitsu by the hand and began leading her inside Mason Izumo, leaving Himura, Mia, and Naruto as the only ones outside. "Well," Mia started with a slight smile that was directed everywhere except towards Naruto. "I think I will go and start dinner." And with that she spun on one heel and began walking back inside of the boarding house. Naruto closed his eyes and released a large exhale of breath. It looked like his conversation with Mia was going to be a lot harder than his original estimation. Not a good thing since he had been going for a worst-case scenario in that estimation too. "Naruto, are you all right?" asked Himura. After casting the fire user a casual glance, the recipient of his question noted that the partial male Sekirei was looking concerned. His eyes kept darting from Naruto to the doorway as if he had just now realized he was missing something and was hoping to figure it out. "Yeah, I'm fine," Naruto answered with a tired sigh. "Just trying to think of a reasonable way to get out of the hole I seem to have dug myself in." Himura's brow furrowed at the strange words, no doubt trying to discern their hidden meaning. In the end, he seemed to decide it was better that he not know what was going on in his Ashikabi's head and shrugged. "In that case, I think I'll take a nap," he concluded, before beginning his walk towards the door. He stopped just before entering, however, and turned his head to look back at the blonde shinobi with a small smile. "You did a good thing today, Naruto." His expression then morphed into a small frown. "Even if I still don't agree with the plan we went through, complaining about it now won't help much," Naruto said with a shrug. "What's done is done, and my plan seems to have worked, possibly better than I thought it would." Idly, his left hand went into his pocket in a casual display. He looked over at Himura, noting the fire user's small scowl before smiling. "Thanks, Himura. It actually means a lot to me to hear you say that." It's nothing," Himura stuttered slightly, turning his head so that Naruto couldn't see his face. The blonde frowned as he stared at his newest Sekirei's back, his head tilting to the side in confusion. "Anyways, I'll talk to you later, Naruto." And with that, Himura walked through the front door, leaving Naruto to himself. The blonde stared after him, taking a moment to empty his mind before deciding it was time for him to get a move on. He entered the boarding house and began to make his way upstairs. It was just as he was finishing his climb that Matsu came out from behind the swinging door that hid her room. Naruto-tan, she greeted him brightly. I'm glad to see the mission went off without a hitch. Oh, it went off a bit better than that, Naruto said, smiling in a way that told the redhead he was very pleased with the way the rescue Chiho operation had panned out. When Matsu just looked at him in confusion, the blonde reached into his left pocket, and he pulled out a very small thumb drive. It was black and rectangular with rounded edges. He tossed the device to Matsu, who caught it in her hand and gave it a curious look, before turning said same look on him. When I fought against Toyotama and Ichiya, I managed to put a tracking device on their clothes, the blonde explained. It's very small, almost unnoticeable, and waterproof so it won't get destroyed if the clothing it's attached to gets thrown in the wash. You really know how to please a girl, don't you? Matsu said, giving him a look, her glasses glinting with an ominous, perverted gleam and her cheeks taking on a mild red hue. Naruto recognized the look well enough, and once more found himself in a conundrum as he tried to decide just what he should do in response to the redhead's look and mild teasing. How far should he go? Should he just flirt back, or should he actually do something that involved more physical intimacy? It was a frustrating position for him to be in. Naruto, for all his know-how on pleasing women, had very little experience in the way of maintaining a stable, healthy relationship. Those few relationships he did have at one point were near the beginning of his existence, and well, it was quite obvious how those all turned out. Glad to know you like my gift. In the end, Naruto just decided a little back and forth banter would be fine for now. He didn't want to rush things after all. The small moment ended, however, when Naruto realized he should probably hurry this up so he could get to healing Chiho. From what I could determine from my meeting with Higa, Toyotama and Ichiya, seemed to be his go-to Sekirei when it comes to the more important jobs, like when he's attempting to blackmail an Ashikabi into doing his bidding. They may also be his bodyguards, which is good for us if true. I want you to monitor them constantly. Keep at least one of your monitors on those two and record everything they do for later perusal. Each night, the two of us will review what they did that day to see if there is anything we can use to disrupt Higa's operations. While a part of Naruto wished he could simply take Higa out of the game, or even capture him and keep him locked up somewhere so the man Sekirei would have to do as Naruto said, this way was really the only one that was feasible at the moment. It was also the best option as far as he could see. Taking Higa out of the game may have rid Naruto of some competition, but it would have also meant that there would be a power vacuum in the East. Normally such a thing wouldn't be a problem, but when putting the fact that the Sekirei plan was supposed to be a secret into consideration, it created a whole new slew of issues that Naruto didn't want to deal with. Right now, the East, West, and South were stable because of the respective big game Ashikabis living there. Take them away, and you had a bunch of people who would begin fighting in order to fill that gap, which in turn held the possibility of revealing the existence of Sekirei, which further led to the possibility of his own existence being revealed when the Sekirei battles caught the eye of government agencies other than MBI. Nothing good would come of it, and so for the moment it was best to leave Higa and the other two respective powerhouses to their own devices. As for the other plan, Naruto didn't even want to think about the trouble that would come from keeping Higa captive. The man wasn't just a high-profile Ashikabi, he was also the heir to a large pharmaceutical corporation. His disappearance wouldn't go unnoticed, which would lead to the same problem that getting rid of him in a more permanent way would do. Only instead of the other Ashikabis being the ones to reveal the existence of Sekirei, it would be the authorities that would no doubt be sent to look for Higa upon his disappearance. Aside from that, Naruto had no place to keep the man captive. Miya most certainly would not let him hold a man prisoner here, and even if he managed to find a place to hold him, there was no guarantee his Sekirei wouldn't find and rescue him. It wasn't like he could keep an eye on the man 24/7. At least, not without clones, but that just wasn't something he was willing to do right now. Right, Matsu muttered as she turned her eyes from Naruto back to the thumb drive in her hand. She seemed disappointed for some reason, but the blonde was hardly paying attention to that as his mind was already focused on possible plans of action to take. Matsu will get on this right away. Thanks, Matsu, Naruto said with an honest smile. It still felt kind of weird, smiling that is. Most of his smiles before the past week had been fake, merely a mask he had used to hide his cynical nature from the rest of the world. Since immersing himself into the bond he had formed with his Sekirei, his smiles had become easier and less the mask they had been and more of the genuine article. That didn't change the fact that it had been so long since he'd honestly smiled that it felt unnatural, but he supposed it was just something he would have to get used to. No problem, Matsu said with a sigh. She waved her free hand at him, a gesture to make him get moving. Go on, Naruto-tan still has to fix up Uzumaki-tan's Ashikabi. I'll get started on this. Oh. Wait here for a moment. Naruto blinked, nonplussed when Matsu rushed back inside of her room. He heard some scuttling from behind the secret passage before the red head came back out, his android phone in her hand. Here, she said, holding the phone out to him. Matsu figured Naruto-tan would probably want this back. Thanks, Matsu, Naruto said. He had almost forgotten that he had given his phone to the red head for this mission. It wasn't too important, seeing as how he rarely used it for anything other than constant updates from his network via email. But he usually liked having it on hand at all times so he could check his accounts the moment he received a message. As his hand touched the phone, Matsu placed her free hand over his, keeping it in place. Naruto stiffened slightly when he felt a soft jolt run from his hand down the length of his arm at the touch, and he couldn't help but look at his information specialist in confusion. Naruto-san is thinking about this too much, Matsu said, her voice taking on a slightly more mature quality as she switched out the childish tan suffix for the more formal and adult san one. You don't need to worry about how fast or slow you need to take your relationship with your Sekireis. You're our Ashikabi, anything you want to do with us, I guarantee we'll want to do with you. She gave him a slightly mischievous smile, her more childish persona returning. Matsu knows she wouldn't mind experimenting with Naruto-tan. Naruto opened up his mouth, then just as quickly closed it. How had she managed to tell what he was thinking? Was he really that transparent? No, that couldn't be it. Even though he had been having issues with his emotions since becoming an Ashikabi, he had gotten much better at keeping them under wraps. So then, how did you know? Naruto asked weakly. Matsu just smiled. Matsu is Naruto-tan's Sekirei, she told him in a chiding tone, speaking as if the answer should have been obvious. And perhaps it should have. Naruto knew that the bond went both ways. He had seen an example of it before the mission, but he thought it only worked when he was feeling strong emotions. Whether or not that was the case, it didn't seem to matter as much at the moment as Matsu continued to smile at him. Of course she would know what her Ashikabi is thinking. I suppose you would, Naruto allowed, speaking slowly. He decided that, for the moment at least, he would not think about this slightly new discovery he had made in regards to the bond. It wouldn't do him any good, and his attention was needed elsewhere at the moment. With the equivalent of a mental headshake, he banished the thoughts on bonds and refocused on Matsu. However, it isn't that simple. Oh, Matsu raised her eyebrows. Matsu doesn't see what is so complicated about it. You're our Ashikabi, we're your Sekirei. Seems pretty simple to me. Maybe it is for you, Naruto started. But that's because you're a Sekirei. You've probably grown up knowing that you would eventually be bound to a single person for the rest of your life. It was probably also instinct for Sekirei to know that they would be bonded to one person who they would devote their lives to. How else would they be able to recognize their Ashikabis otherwise? The blonde didn't voice that as he continued. However, for me it's not that simple. I never expected to find myself being bound to even one woman, let alone 5. 4.5, Matsu corrected with a grin. It took Naruto to understand what she was talking about, but when he did, a snort of amusement escaped his lips. All right, 4.5, he corrected, his lips forming a wry grin. Maybe even just 4 if we count Kusano has a half as well. In either event, finding myself not only in a relationship with so many females, but also bound to them isn't something I ever expected to happen. And truth be told, I've never had a stable relationship before. Not in several thousand years at least, but Matsu didn't need to know that right now. Shake his head, he continued. I just don't want to rush into this and screw things up. Matsu stared at him for several seconds that felt like they were stretching out into minutes. Are you still afraid of letting us get close to you? She asked, the switch from first person speaking to third going unnoticed by both of them. Is that why you're not doing anything with us? Naruto opened his mouth to reply in the negative when he paused and actually thought about her words. Was that why he wasn't being very affectionate with his Sekirei? He was being a lot more open with them, Naruto knew, but he still had yet to do anything that would be considered romantic or intimate with any of them. And even though he wouldn't admit to it, he was still doing his best to keep his Sekirei so busy that they didn't have time to even think about doing the activities that couples usually do, much less do them. Maybe, he admitted with a small sigh. Matsu opened her mouth to speak, but Naruto interrupted her before she could say anything. But you have to understand, Matsu, things aren't as simple for me as they are for you. He paused for just a moment, deciding on how much he should tell her. Out of all the Sekirei he had, the redhead was the only one who had a small inkling about who he was. Or at least, who he was in the eyes of Hiroto Minaka. At the very least, she had probably already guessed that he was older than his 18-year profile said. "I've been like this for a long time," he finally admitted. It was a vague enough answer that she would be able to make her own interpretations without him giving anything away. As a Sekirei, when an Ashikabi wings you, it's pretty much an instantaneous love. I'm guessing that from the moment you begin to react, your mind and body are already telling you that you love the person you're bonding to. Yes. Matsu hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod. For humans, it's different, and for me, it's even different still. I have never bonded to anyone before now, not even in a figurative sense, and I don't trust easily either. While you and the other Sekirei can go straight from getting winged to the bedroom, it's going to take me more than just a few days for my mind to accept everything that's happened. Unspoken was the request that Matsu be patient and let things come at their own pace. Matsu huffed, crossing her arms under her chest. Matsu still wishes Naruto-tan would get his head out of his ass, be a good Ashikabi and let Matsu experiment on him, she said, and Naruto smiled as he realized that while the redhead may not like it, she was at least willing to accept his answer for the moment. There will probably come a time when she would no longer be willing to wait, but hopefully by that time, he would actually be ready to accept all that being bonded to a Sekirei, or in his case, a group of Sekirei, meant. "Well, maybe if you're a good girl and get those profiles I requested finished, I'll let you do some experimentation," he joked. Matsu, however, seemed to take his words in a more literal sense as she quickly perked up. "Then Matsu will get started on those profiles right away," she told him seriously as a childishly acting Matsu could be. Before Naruto could make a comment, she hurried back inside of her room and the turning door/wall rotated shut. For a few seconds, Naruto stood there, blinking, before shaking his head and deciding that whatever had just happened wasn't something he needed to think about at this point. Thus he turned and began walking down the hall towards Uzume's room. When he got there, the blonde knocked on the door and then waited patiently for it to be answered. There was a moment of silence, followed by the thud of bare feet on tatami mats that grew closer. A second later, the door opened and Uzume stood there, staring at him with an expression that was both determined and nervous. "Naruto," she said, using his first name for the first time. She hesitated for a moment, worrying her lower lip, then seemed to pluck her courage and plunged ahead. "Can you really heal my Chiho?" she asked. "Well, I first need to find out what's wrong with her," Naruto answered honestly. "Without knowing what it is I'm supposed to be healing, there isn't much I can do." His answer did not seem to please Uzume, who opened her mouth to respond when he cut her off. "But I am positive that whatever illness your Ashikabi has caught can be healed." Uzume closed her mouth, stood there for a second, and then gave him a nod as she moved aside to allow him entrance into her room. "Come on in," she said softly. Naruto nodded as he entered the room. It looked a lot like the bedroom he shared with his Sekirei, though considering they were in the same house, that wasn't surprising. The only differences between the two rooms came in appliances and furniture. Uzume didn't have the desk or bed, nor the same style in decoration that he had. What she did have was a small futon laid out in the middle of the room that her Ashikabi was currently lying in, a dresser drawer on standing next to a door that Naruto assumed led to her closet, and a long poled lamp standing in a corner of the room near the window. Other than that, it was pretty bare. Naruto moved forward, making his way towards Chiho, where he sat in siesta upon reaching her. The young girl in her teens watched him with calm eyes. She didn't seem at all concerned that he might have duplicitous intentions, most likely due to her trust in Uzume. For a moment, Naruto sat there, unsure of just how to get this whole thing started. He was about to use what essentially amounted to supernatural powers that humanity simply wasn't capable of anymore, abilities that, except for his most recent lapses in judgment when it came to his Sekirei, he had kept hidden for thousands of years. It seemed that he hadn't quite thought about the consequences of just what using medical ninjutsu on a girl who was not only not one of his Sekirei, but also held no loyalty to him other than possibly gratitude for helping Uzume. Once again, it seemed that he had jumped headfirst into a situation without really thinking about all that doing so would entail. Naruto couldn't help but wonder if this was going to become the standard when it came to dealing with instances where people asked him for help. "It looks like I'll be in your care, Naruto-san," Chiho said, snapping the whiskered blonde out of his thoughts. "Ah," Naruto started, blinking. "Please take care of me too." He blinked again when the words came out of his mouth registered. As one who had not only lived for a long time, but never stayed in the same place for very long, he had never been one for tradition and customary formalities. With so many different customs around the world, which continued to change as people changed. Keeping up on customs had never been one of his strongest points. One might even say it was a weakness. After all, if you're living in England, adding the san suffix to someone's name would cause many odd looks. This fact didn't even include his time before the Fourth Great Shinobi War. Back then, Naruto had never followed customs either. Aside from adding the chan suffix to the names of people who had become important to him, he had always ignored customs and etiquette. Examples of such being the disrespectful names he had often given to people in higher positions of authority. Which was why he found it somewhat disturbing that he had replied to Chiho's formal response with what appeared to be a knee-jerk reaction. It was just not something he would have expected himself to do. Naruto would have thought on this some more, but upon remembering where he was and what he was about to do, figured that strange out-of-character moments could wait for analysis until after he had finished healing Chiho. And so, with a shake of his head, the eternal shinobi once more forced himself to focus on the girl in front of him. "All right," he started, frowning for a moment before giving a nod. "I want you to close your eyes and relax if possible. Try not to think of anything that might be distracting." Okay. It just went to show Naruto how much trust Chiho had in Uzumaki when she did exactly as he asked without hesitation. She seemed to trust in her Sekirei's judgment so completely that she would even follow through on the advice of a complete stranger. It made him feel vaguely uncomfortable, though he did not show that. Instead, he began the process of healing her. His hands came together and began forming a chain of hand seals, going through them a bit more slowly than usual to make sure they were correct. When he finished on the ram seal, his left hand began to glow a light blue. A startled gasp from behind him drew his attention to the fact that Uzumaki was still in the room. He thought about stopping and asking her to leave, but since his healing abilities were already well known, decided to allow her to stay, for the moment at least. He gently placed his glowing hand directly over Chiho's forehead. There was a moment in which nothing seemed to happen, then all at once the young Ashikabi seemed to relax. Her muscles loosened, her breathing evened out and deepened, and her mouth parted slightly to allow for a higher intake of oxygen. "What are you doing to my Chiho?" asked Uzumaki, sounding both worried and angry. Naruto turned his head to look at the tomboyish Sekirei. "Just putting her to sleep," he answered mildly. "It's easier for me to heal a patient if they're completely relaxed." When she didn't respond immediately, he wondered if she had caught on to his small lie. The truth was Naruto had put Chiho to sleep because he didn't want another person finding out about his powers. In his mind, there were already too many people who knew, and adding another person to that list was a risk he didn't want to take. However, when Uzumaki eventually gave him a nod, he barely managed to cover his sigh of relief. "I suppose that makes sense," she admitted, though she didn't sound like she liked doing so. With a small shake of her head, the cloth-using Sekirei focused on a topic she deemed much more important. "So how long will it take for you to heal her?" "I don't know yet," Naruto answered, mildly annoyed at the Sekirei's one-track mind. He knew she was just worried about her Ashikabi, but that didn't mean it didn't bother him that she was already asking him questions when he had yet to even find out what was wrong with her. "I still have to discover what's wrong with her in the first place." "And how long will that take?" Uzumaki pressed. "A lot longer than it normally would if you keep asking questions while I'm trying to work," Naruto quipped in a slightly irritable voice. When Uzumaki stopped talking, he nodded his head and went on to the next phase of healing. Several more hand seals later, Naruto activated a medical scanning jutsu and began to run his hand, now covered in a wreath of green flames, up and down Chiho's body with only a few inches of space between them. The first thing he discovered was that, yes, he could heal Chiho. In fact, aside from the fact that doing so would require even more concentration than when he had healed Hamura, the actual process of healing the much younger Ashikabi would be quite easy. The second thing he noticed was the reason for this. It seemed that, much like his theory on what made someone an Ashikabi was correct. The answer was chakra. Chiho had chakra, enough that she was capable of winging a Sekirei. It wasn't much when compared to the average ninja. In fact, she only had about as much chakra as Sakura had after graduating from the Shinobi Academy, and Sakura had below-average chakra reserves back then. However, while not much compared to the ninja of his era, that was about 10 times more chakra than the average human in this era. When put into that perspective, the difference in reserves was quite extraordinary. And it was because of this that Chiho was ill. Uzumaki's Ashikabi was actually suffering from a very rare case of chakra poisoning. It seemed that much like most people who are born in this day and age, her tenketsu had remained closed. For most people this wouldn't be a problem, they didn't possess enough chakra for it to be a big deal. But for Chiho it was. It was not a well-known fact, and something Naruto had only discovered through years of meditation. But when a person's chakra reserves were at full capacity, the excess chakra they produced would be released through the tenketsu in order to prevent the chakra within them from building up and damaging their body. This illness had actually been very common amongst civilians during the Shinobi era. Some civilians had possessed naturally higher than average reserves, but because they had never been trained to use their chakra, their tenketsu remained closed, and thus, the chakra inside of them built up and began to damage their body. In these instances, all it would have required for them to be fixed was for the civilian in question to take a trip to the hospital and have the excess chakra purged from their chakra coils, which of course would explain why no one had been able to cure the illness Chiho was suffering from. There was only one problem Naruto could see in all this, and that was that he did not know the jutsu medical ninja used to purge chakra from someone's tenketsu. Because he had never needed to learn it, Sakura had never taught it to him. However, while he did not know the jutsu she had used, he had a theory on how he could repair the girl another way. It would just take a lot longer and a lot more effort on his part. So, Uzumaki started once again. She had been fidgety ever since Naruto had first placed his glowing hand over her Ashikabi's still form, and it seemed that after 5 minutes of silently watching her patience had finally come to an end. "I can heal her," Naruto started, and just as Uzumaki began to sag in relief, he dropped another bomb on her. "But I'll need you to leave the room." Uzumaki stiffened once more and cast him a glare. "What do you mean, leave the room?" she asked, her voice rising in pitch. "I'm not leaving Chiho's side until she's healed." "Then I'm afraid you're going to be waiting forever," Naruto replied mildly. He might have been angrier by her response had he not expected her to react like this. But considering that her Ashikabi's continued health was on the line, the blonde had already taken into account that this was the reaction he would be getting. Uzumaki narrowed her eyes. "Are you telling me that you won't heal my Chiho?" she asked in a dangerous tone. "Not unless you leave the room," Naruto answered with a nod. Before Uzumaki could make an angry retort, he held up his hand to keep her from speaking. "Before you throw a hissy fit, you should at least let me explain myself." She hesitated, and for a moment it looked like she might disregard his words, but then seemed to think better of it and made a cutting gesture with her hand for him to continue. "It had better be a damn good explanation," she warned, an unspoken threat present in her voice. Naruto frowned at that but tried not to let her words bother him. She was just worried for her Ashikabi, he told himself. "The first thing you should know is that I'm not a healer by profession," he told her slowly, his mind working on a way to tell her what she needed to know without revealing too much. "The abilities I have were gained through a lot of hard work, and even now requires more effort for me to use than most. This is because of the amount of concentration required to use healing techniques like this." "Concentration?" Uzumaki questioned, her brow furrowing. Naruto nodded. "Yes, in order to heal someone it requires me to pump my power into them." That was the layman's explanation anyways. It required a lot more than just pumping chakra into another person, like actually turning said chakra into medical chakra, but there was no need to go that far into his description. "So what's the problem then?" Uzumaki asked with a huff. "You just pump your strange healing power into them and let it do its thing, right? Doesn't sound that hard to me." "It's hard because if you pump too much power into someone it could kill them," Naruto snapped, instantly shutting Uzumaki up. "Having a foreign energy invading your body may not do much to a Sekirei, but humans are much more frail than you are. If I pump too much power into a person, their body would be unable to handle the strain that having a foreign energy produced, and would they end up being destroyed from the inside out." As Naruto continued speaking, Uzumaki's face got paler and paler until it was so white it looked almost translucent. "Because of that, I need absolute concentration when healing someone, and I won't be able to concentrate with you hovering over my shoulder." Uzumaki oscillated between staring at Naruto with unease and looking down at her Sekirei in worry. It was impossible to miss the internal debate she was having in her mind over what to do. Naruto could almost see the cogs in her head turning. On the one hand, she didn't want to leave her Ashikabi's presence for anything. Yet if she didn't, then there was a very real possibility that he could screw up and Chiho would die as a result. The answer on what to do was clear. Even Uzumaki knew she only had one option, but getting the heart to realize that took time. Fortunately, not much time in this instance. A few seconds after Naruto's words registered, Uzumaki's posture slumped in on itself and her face looked resigned. "All right," she said, sounding incredibly depressed. Were it not for the fact that he was actually being dead serious and knew this was as much for Chiho's own good as it was anything else. I'll just wait outside. With that, she stood up and began a slow walk towards the door. The reluctance to be away from her Ashikabi was clear in her steps, as the time between each moment she put one foot down increased the further away she got. It took almost 5 minutes alone for her to reach the door, which in Naruto's mind was just 5 minutes he could have been using to save Chiho. When she got to the door, she placed her hand on the handle, then stopped. "You can save her, right?" she asked, turning her head just enough to give him a glimpse of her profile. Naruto gave her a nod. Yes, Uzume nodded, closed her eyes, then grimaced as she left the room without another word. When the door clicked shut behind her, Naruto sighed and turned back to the task at hand. Cracking his Kenkuckles, Naruto began going through a set of handseals he would need to heal the young teen in front of him. Chiho wouldn't heal herself after all. It took Naruto a lot longer to heal Chiho than it had for him to heal Hamura. By the time he had finished, the sun had already gone down. His Sekirei must be asleep by now, and he was almost surprised that no one had tried to interrupt him, but figured Uzume had likely been keeping them away so he would be able to stay focused. With a sigh, Naruto wiped the sweat from his brow as he looked at the still sleeping Chiho. Outwardly, there were no changes. She still looked like a rail-thin girl who would be blown away by a stiff breeze, but that was to be expected. He had only fixed the main problem after all, her closed tenketsu. The rest could only be healed with time. The process behind Chiho's healing had been relatively simple. Because Naruto didn't know the jutsu required to purge excess chakra from the human body, he had been forced to create his own method for dealing with the chakra. That method being to forcefully open the tenketsu points so the chakra could be released naturally. Normally, such a process would have never even been considered. It was not dangerous but suicidal. For a person's tenketsu points to be forcefully opened was akin to having every single one of their capillaries burst open at the same time, which didn't create a very pretty picture. However, due to the way Naruto's chakra worked, so long as it was released in very small amounts, it could be used to heal any damage done to the person's chakra coils while he opened the tenketsu points. And therein lay the reason it had taken him so long to heal Chiho. Not only did the process require him to open each tenketsu individually, it also required him to use a technique he had devised to imitate perfect chakra control. Naruto would never have perfect chakra control. That was a simple fact that had become known to him during his 3-year training trip with Jiraiya. Before he had even graduated the academy, his reserves of chakra had been on par with Sarutobi Hiruzen, the legendary professor and Sandaime Hokage. After his 3-year training trip, his reserves had increased by a fourth, making the only person that had been stronger than him at the time Uchiha Madara. Now, however, Naruto had no equal. His chakra was on a level of its own. Comparing his chakra to Uchiha Madara in this day and age was like comparing the chakra of a newly minted genin with above-average reserves to a Kage. There was simply no contest. Of course, all that meant was that Naruto had next to no control over his chakra. He could use a few techniques, some basic nature manipulation, but many of his higher-tier jutsu that require more control and less chakra were beyond his grasp. It was just another reason for him to get back in shape, though doing chakra control exercises would have to wait until he had a place he could practice in private. Surprisingly enough, medical ninjutsu was one of the few things he was capable of. This was because of the technique he had created to imitate perfect chakra control. Essentially, what he did was simultaneously concentrate on the jutsu he was using and expelling a constant stream of chakra through the other tenketsu within his body when he started using too much. In other words, when Naruto used medical ninjutsu, he wasn't just expelling medical chakra through his hands, but also through several of the 361 tenketsu points located around his body. Generally, he used the tenketsu located in his back. It was easy, and unlike expelling chakra through his feet, wouldn't cause him to get launched 200 feet into the air, and unlike expelling it through his back, had no chance of accidentally pumping more chakra into his patient than was safe. The technique itself was not one he used often due to how draining it was, and Naruto knew he would be suffering from mental fatigue later on for doing this. It was a technique he had created for the specific purpose of using medical ninjutsu, and could not be used for anything else due to the sheer amount of focus it took to concentrate on it. Splitting his attention between his medical jutsu and his chakra expulsion technique was easy when compared to splitting his attention between predicting the moves on his enemies, reacting to said enemies via his own body, Deciding what jutsu he wanted to use at any given time, the hand seals needed for the jutsu constant observation of the environment so he could use his surroundings to his advantage, the thousands of other variables in combat, and finally the constant expulsion of chakra needed to use his jutsu. Right now, the only abilities he could use his chakra for while in combat were the Kage Bunshin, the permanent henge, large-scale wind manipulation techniques, and reinforcing his own body. And that last one he could use solely because his body was fairly well accustomed to his own chakra, even though using too much would rip it apart. A tired sigh escaped him once again as he realized how much chakra he had been forced to expend in order to heal Chiho. The air was so thick with it that he could almost see a misty blue haze of chakra converging around him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, an almost electric jolt passing through him as the inhuman chakra hung in the air. He hadn't needed to worry about using this technique on Hamura. As a Sekirei, the fire user's body had been naturally predisposed towards accepting his chakra. All he had to worry about back then was turning his own chakra into medical chakra. It was a surprisingly easy feat to do since his chakra had natural healing properties, and then directing that chakra towards the wounds. It was hard but not difficult. What he had just done to Chiho was on a whole other level. The act of turning normal chakra into medical chakra, directing that chakra towards each individual tenketsu point, and then expelling enough chakra from the tenketsu located near his back to the point where his chakra control was perfect, took more concentration and willpower than anything else he had ever done. By the time he had finished, his body had picked up a slight sheen of sweat, and his breathing was a bit heavy. Still, the results were well worth the effort. Chiho was healed. Naruto made to stand up, and almost stumbled when he discovered that his legs had fallen asleep from sitting in seiza for so long. He winced a bit as he forced his legs to move until feeling began to return, then stood back up once more. The blonde took a moment to just stand there, stretching his arms out above his head and listening as his bones popped and cracked deliciously. After satisfying his body's desire for a good stretch, Naruto made his way out of the room. Uzume was there, as he suspected she would be, and in the time it had taken him to step out of the room to the moment he closed the door, Uzume had managed to get up and move directly into his personal space. "How is Chiho?" she asked, her voice both irritated and worried. There were a few black marks under her eyes and worry lines on her face to show that she had likely been running herself ragged by thinking of all the things that could go wrong. She had probably not eaten anything either, and considering how rigidly she had been standing, had been too worried to get any rest. "Chiho will be fine," Naruto said, and with those few words Uzume's entire body seemed to almost collapse. "She's still weak though, her body will need a lot of nourishment to regain all the weight she's lost, and after a while she'll need to be put under a training regime to regain full functionality of her legs, but her life is no longer in danger from her illness." So she's okay?" Uzume's eyes were searching, her voice weak. It seemed she had gone for so long thinking her Ashikabi would never be healed that to hear someone telling her that Chiho was no longer in danger of dying was almost too good to be true. "As I said," Naruto repeated, "Chiho will be fine." That seemed to be all the tomboyish Sekirei could take. Her legs buckled and she fell forward, collapsing against Naruto. In his startlement, the blonde fell backwards, and his back hit the door with a dull thud. A pair of hands began clutching his shirt, which had only taken a few seconds before becoming soaked by tears as Uzume buried her face in his chest and cried out her relief. For his part, Naruto was unsure of what to do about this. He had never really been one for comforting others, even during the Shinobi era. Back then, it had been because he was a clueless youth who wouldn't know how to comfort someone if he was slapped in the face and told exactly what he should do. Now it was because he simply hadn't comforted anybody for a long time. Why would he need to? Naruto had not gotten close to anyone in several thousand years, not since that day. Still, his mind's hesitation only lasted for a second before he decided to simply let the busty woman cry herself out. His hands moved, hesitating when they reached her back only for a second, before he placed them on Uzume's upper back and began to rub them in small circles. He wasn't exactly sure if he was doing this right or not, and it became especially bad when Uzume seemed to press herself deeper against him and began crying that much harder. Hey, Uzume," Naruto stuttered slightly. He was beginning to feel unnerved by this whole scenario. He had been expecting many things when he came out and informed Uzume that her Ashikabi was no longer in danger of dying from a normally terminal illness. Her prostrating herself on the floor and thanking him over and over again, her giving him a large smile, and making some crack about how she and Chiho would be glad to join his harem if he asked, her bodily shoving him out of the way so she could see her Ashikabi. In all those thoughts and ideas, he had never imagined that the girl would break down so completely and begin crying into his chest. He probably should have, Naruto realized with a sigh. Girls had always been weird and emotional like that. Thank you, Uzume sniffed, her voice muffled as it was still buried in his chest. Thank you so much. There was a shift of movement and a rustling of fabric as she unburied herself from his pectorals and looked up at him, her chin now resting against his chest. I was so worried, she murmured softly. I always tried to put on a brave face for her, but whenever I left, all I wanted to do was cry. She shifted again, pressing left side of her head against his chest as her hands unclenched themselves and slid around his torso. If Naruto had been a normal human, the hug she gave him probably would have crushed his rib cage. I was about to give up hope. It's fine, Naruto muttered, turning his head to the side in an effort to find something interesting to occupy his time. He wasn't embarrassed, as several thousand-year-old immortals didn't get embarrassed. It was just that he was so unused to something like this happening that he didn't know how to take it. Yeah, right. His cheeks turned a dark red when a pair of warm, soft, and moist lips were pressed upon his left cheek. He jerked away from the contact as if burned and looked at Uzume with wide eyes. "Well, what was that for?" he asked, his voice so shocked it was nothing more than a whisper. Uzume's eyes danced mischievously as she looked at him. It created a startling contrast when compared to her puff red eyes and the tear stains that went down her cheeks. "That was a thank you," she told him, her grin widening as she saw the undeniable flush of his cheeks. "You're not embarrassed by something as simple as a small kiss on the cheek, are you?" "Of course not," Naruto snapped irritably, grimacing when he saw her begin snickering at him. He wasn't embarrassed, damn it. He was just surprised. That was all. He was so going to get her back for this. She wouldn't know when, she wouldn't know how, but when Uzume least expected it, he would get his revenge. "Anyways, you should probably see to your Ashikabi," he started, changing the subject and instantly making the girl sober up. "She won't wake up until tomorrow, but I figured you'd want to be with her regardless." "Yeah," Uzume's voice went soft again along with her eyes. It was a look he had only seen recently whenever her mind strayed to the thin girl currently sleeping in the room behind them. She looked back up at Naruto, even as she released him from her hug and stepped back. "I meant what I said earlier, thank you, Naruto." "It's fine," Naruto said with a smile as he finally managed to get his embarrassment down to a manageable level. He was also pleased to note that her heartfelt thanks hadn't bothered him like the last time. Granted, she had been crying into his chest then, so, shaking his head, Naruto banished those thoughts and looked back at the tomboy. "What kind of friend would I be if I didn't help you and your Ashikabi in your time of need?" he asked rhetorically. "Not a very good one, I can tell you that." With an internal sigh, Naruto realized that he may very well be growing soft. He hadn't even thought about how he could turn Uzume's feeling of being indebted to him to his advantage, something he surely would have done before becoming an Ashikabi. He wasn't even sure if he could blame this new situation on the bond anymore, as he didn't seem to be as affected by it as he used to. Or was this perhaps a new development that came from actually allowing himself to be immersed within the bond? Such a theory definitely bore further investigation in the future. He was thinking way too much. "Then I guess I should be very glad we're friends," Uzume replied, amused and curious when she saw the blonde pinching the bridge of his nose as if he had a headache. "Damn right you should," Naruto replied as he tried to shake of his coming headache that was coming from his mind thinking too much while it was so fatigued. There was still a lot that needed to be done, and he couldn't do it if he was suffering from a migraine. "If we weren't, I may have very well decided to give you the Higa treatment." That being to use Uzume as a means to help him get rid of some of the competition without her knowing it before tossing her aside like so much used trash. Naruto absently had to wonder what Higa's reaction would be when he discovered that Naruto planned on using him for that very same reason. If nothing else, it would be funny to see the man rage when he realized what Naruto was doing. Uzume shivered. "Not funny, bro, seriously not funny." Naruto just gave her a grin. The first thing Naruto did after leaving Uzume, who had rushed in her room to be with her Ashikabi, was to get something to eat. He had spent a lot of chakra due to the requirements of using his perfect chakra control technique, and when added to the fact that he hadn't used it in well over 2,000 years, the blonde knew he had wasted a lot more chakra than he should have. Because of that, he was quite hungry. The more chakra he expended, the more he needed to eat in order to replenish. It was like that with all ninja, especially those who had larger reserves. there was a reason the Akamichi ate so much. And so Naruto spent around an hour making 3 dozen sandwiches using various meats, cheeses, and vegetables, and another 15 minutes eating them all. Had anyone else been there to see it, they probably would have been impressed that a human could eat just as much as Musubi. That, or they may have just gotten sick watching him stuff food into his face so quickly his hands were merely a blur. When he had finally managed to satiate himself, Naruto knew it was finally time to face the music and do something that he had been dreading since his mission to rescue Chiho had come to a close: apologizing to Mia. As he knocked on the door to Mia's room and then began the waiting game, a sense of nervousness welled up inside of him. How angry was she? Would an apology even be enough? And if not, what could he do to make things right? Naruto knew he had screwed up badly, a difficult thing for a man who had lived for several thousand years. There were people in their 60s who refused to admit to being wrong, stubborn old people that they were. They should try putting themselves in Naruto's shoes for a day before bitching and moaning. He was distracted from his thoughts by the soft pitter-patter of feet making their way across tatami mat flooring, followed by a click of the door before it opened. Mia stood there, blinking several times as she stared at him. She looked like she had just woken up, her hair was in a bit of disarray, her eyes were a bit droopy. Naruto stood there nervously, wondering if perhaps he should have waited until tomorrow to beg for forgiveness. Yet even as he wondered that, the Lavenderette seemed to wake up, her eyes gained focus, became sharp and calculating. "Uzumaki-san," she spoke in a cold tone that sent shivers down his spine. Oh yeah, she was definitely not happy with him. "Is there something you need?" Naruto swallowed, both physically as well as his pride. Slowly, he got down on his knees, placed both hands on the floor, bent at the waist, and pressed his forehead against the wood tiling, prostrating himself before the woman who had done the same thing to him just this morning. "I'm sorry," he apologized, his voice clear and steady. Naruto could not see her face, seeing as even if he had his eyes open, they would only be able to see the wooden tiles of the hallway floor, so he did not know what expression she had on. Was she shocked, angry, apprehensive? Was she feeling the same sense of wrongness he had felt when she had done this to him? He supposed it didn't matter. All that mattered was continuing before he lost his nerve. "I didn't mean to run out on you this morning when you had apologized. To be honest, A hand on his shoulder stopped him from speaking or trying to speak. Trying to find the right words to express his feelings was harder than he thought. Even before he locked up his emotions, Naruto had always preferred using his fists to telling people how he felt. Sure, there were occasions where he would make some grand speech. Okay, so there were a lot of times he had made speeches, but all those times had been about his ninja way, or how he never went back on his word. They had nothing to do with his feelings. Even back during the Shinobi era, he had often hid behind a mask. Looking up, Naruto found himself staring into the purple eyes of Mia. She still wasn't smiling, her eyes were still cold, but there was a slight glimmer of emotion beneath them that had not been there before he prostrated himself before her. "Stand up, Naruto-san," she murmured, and Naruto took the fact that she was using his first name as a good sign. When he did as asked, she opened the door to her room and gestured to him. "Come inside." Once more, Naruto decided it would be in his best interest not to ignore a direct command from her right now, and did as asked. The room remained unchanged from the last time he had been inside. As the door clicked shut behind him, Mia walked past him without a word, sat down on the floor in seiza, and then gestured for him to do the same. Naruto wisely chose to follow her orders once again and sat down exactly 5 feet away from her. For a moment all was silent. Naruto sat before the landlady of Mason Izumo, trying his best not to fidget like a child. It was a very unfamiliar and distinctly unpleasant feeling, wanting to make things right but not knowing how to do that. Things had been so much easier when he couldn't have given 2 shits about what other people thought. Meanwhile, Mia was staring at him with an impassive gaze, her eyes searching him, piercing him in a way that left the blonde feeling naked. It was as if his entire soul was being laid bare before the woman in front of him. It was not a feeling he was used to, and something he hoped to avoid whenever he could in the future. "What brought this about, I wonder?" Mia said, and Naruto was unsure whether she was asking a question or merely making a rhetorical comment. Despite that, he decided to answer her anyways. After Naruto paused, hesitation clear on his features. He frowned for a moment, then shook his head and continued. "After I ran out on you, I couldn't get what happened out of my mind. I kept asking myself why would you do something like that? Why would someone so powerful bow before another and ask for their forgiveness? It hadn't made sense to him at the time, and to be honest, it still didn't. It was unexpected, and a part of it bothered me. I think it's because I know that if our situations were reversed, I would have never been able to do that. It was an admittance of one of his many faults, and one of the oldest problems he had. Naruto had always disliked being wrong, even when he was younger, and wrong almost every time he opened his mouth. He hated admitting it. Dragging an admittance of him being wrong was worse than pulling teeth. It took far more effort than it was worth, and that hatred of being wrong had only grown in time. "And yet you did the same as I did just now, did you not?" stated Mia, referring to his earlier display outside her hall just a minute ago. She tilted her head to the side curiously. "Was that not the same thing?" she asked, and Naruto snorted. "It's much easier to apologize to someone who had already extended an olive branch," Naruto replied with a touch of cynicism. "Had our situations been reversed, if you had not made the first move, I don't doubt that we would have never made an attempt at reconciliation." "You say that like we've already forgiven each other," Mia returned coolly. "Like I've already forgiven you." Naruto winced at the small accusation, but did not say anything against it. She had a right to be angry at him. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Naruto said slowly. "Not after running out on you like a coward after you tried to apologize." The blonde paused and once again bowed down before Mia in doji. "But if you could find it within yourself to forgive me, I would be forever grateful, and if there was anything I could do to earn that forgiveness, you need only ask." Had an event like this happened less than 2 weeks ago, Naruto would have never even considered saying such a thing. Hell, he would have never even considered the thought of prostrating himself before another and asking for forgiveness. Had Naruto been his old self, the one that had lived for thousands of years and cared little for those around him, this entire situation would have never happened. He wouldn't have cared. "And what if I told you that the only way I would forgive you was if you told me about yourself?" asked Mia, her voice still cold. "The truth about yourself?" Naruto stiffened for a moment, his head snapped up to meet Mia's eyes, and an internal battle began to wage within his mind. His secret, or secrets as it were, the past he had kept hidden from everyone for thousands of years, his immortality, the eons of accumulated experience that had made him into the person he was today. Could he tell her about it? Could he truly reveal the secrets about himself that he had kept for so long, that he killed to keep from being found out? Was he actually willing to tell her just to earn her forgiveness? Had he really changed that much already? Had he grown so fond of her presence, her playful banter, and those feelings of being in the presence of an equal become so strong that he was willing to toss away thousands of years of secrecy and reveal the secrets others had killed and died for? Looking into her eyes, Naruto made his decision. Is that what you want?" he asked, looking away from her piercing gaze. If it would earn her forgiveness, then he would do it. He would tell her his secrets. Who knows, maybe it would even prove beneficial. Naruto had kept everything to himself for so long, and though he would never admit it to anyone, even himself, there was a part of him that had always longed for someone he could talk to, a confidant who could keep his secrets. It was a small part of him, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. A hand came to rest against his left hand. Looking back, Naruto had to blink and wonder at how fast Mia was to have moved from where she was sitting, in C's he might add, to sitting in the exact same position right in front of him with just a few inches between them. The cold look in her eyes were gone, surprising Naruto, who could only wonder why. "I thank you, Uzumaki Naruto, for being willing to tell me your secrets," she said, her lips finally moving up into a smile and her eyes crinkling. "But it won't be necessary. I forgive you, and I hope that you can also forgive me for my transgressions against you." A small part of Naruto was confused. Had she really forgiven him just like that? Was all it took for him to earn her forgiveness a simple willingness to reveal his secrets? Granted, Mia had no clue as to the true depths of his secrets. How could she when he had not told her? But that didn't change the fact that earning her forgiveness had been too easy. It was only after a few seconds of sitting there, staring at Mia like she had grown several heads, that he realized just what had happened. He had been played. She hadn't asked him to reveal his past. She had simply been testing his integrity to see how far he was willing to go to earn her forgiveness. A part of him felt that he should be angry, but strangely enough, he wasn't. Had he not done similar things in the past? Being angry at Mia for doing something he had done more times than he could count would be hypocritical on his part, and he'd had enough of being a hypocrite to last a lifetime. "Ah yes," Naruto said, turning his head slightly again. For some reason, he found it very hard to maintain eye contact with the lavender-haired landlady right now. Ahem, he coughed into his hand, then continued. The index finger of the hand he coughed on, which was the one that Mia had not placed her hand over, scratching his right cheek. I hope you can forgive me for that too. He looked over at Mia again and saw her confused expression. For taking my anger out on you after I found out you and Matsu had been watching me when I healed Kagura. I was angry, but I was more angry at myself for not being so careful than I was at you. Mia shook her head, smile still in place. There is nothing to forgive. I was the one at fault there. When you kicked me out of Hamura-san's room, I became angry, she admitted, sounding a bit flustered at actually admitting she got angry. Strange, considering how often she used her Hanya mask on others. I wasn't thinking clearly and had Matsu spy on you. I should have realized you had a reason for not wanting me to be there. But if I had been better at explaining the situation, then perhaps none of this would have happened, Naruto began. If I had just explained that what I was about to do was something I didn't wish for others to see, I'm sure you would have respected my wish. I think, Mia began carefully, a self-depreciating smile on her face. There would have been no difference even if you had explained the situation. Her words caused Naruto to pause and think. It had probably taken quite a bit of effort for her to admit that nothing would have changed even if he had given her a viable explanation to not spy on him, considering how he had blown up on her for doing so in the first place. It was a gutsy thing to admit to, and the blonde felt his respect for Mia rise a bit. I guess it would be easier if we just admit that we were both wrong and leave it at that, Naruto finally decided. It would spread the blame between them equally and ensure that neither of them came out of this smelling like roses. Sometimes compromises are the best way to end situations like this without any hard feelings. Agreed, Mia said with a soft giggle, her free hand coming up to hide her mouth behind the sleeve of her kimono. So, are we friends again? Asked Naruto tentatively. He was sure they were, but didn't want to assume anything. We never stopped being friends, Mia told him with her pleasant smile still in place. Just because we had an argument does not mean we stopped being friends. It happens between all friends at some point or another. All this means is that we have now had our first argument, and because we got over it, our friendship will become that much stronger. Naruto shook his head and smiled at her words. While he had lived for a long time, it was clear that Mia had more wisdom than him when it came to relationships. Perhaps because she had been in one not too long ago. The last time Naruto had been in a relationship had been a long time ago, and when it had ended, he had not been left with a good impression of what it meant to be in a relationship. Well, Naruto started, I guess I'd better leave you to get some sleep now that what I came here to do has been accomplished. He smiled at Mia. So I'll see you in the morning, yes? Of course, Mia returned his smile. Okay. Oh, and Mia, yes, your hand. My hand, Mia blinked, then looked down at her hand, specifically the one that was still placed over Naruto's own appendage. Ah, she jerked her hand off his as if burned. I'm terribly sorry, she said, a very soft shade of pink suffusing her cheeks. In the midst of all this conversation and emotion, I guess I forgot about, well. It's all right, Naruto murmured, his own cheeks a little stained as well. Why was his heart pumping so fast? Shaking his head, the blonde stood up and sketched Mia a quick bow. Good night, Mia-chan, I'll see you tomorrow. Startled, Mia's cheeks lit up just a little bit more. She quickly reined in her blush and made to smile at the blonde, only to find him gone, the door clicking shut behind him gently. Good night, she said to the empty air. Despite the fact that Naruto had once again left in a hurry, this time when he left there was a slight smile on the woman's face. Thanks for listening, I do hope you enjoyed it. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below and turn on the bell notification, and also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.